Jesus took Peter, John, and James and went up the mountain to pray. In the Bible, the mountain is a place of encounter with God. It suggests a going up, a journey to an encounter with majesty. Mountains give us a different perspective. If you remember in the Old Testament, Moses met God on Mount Sinai. Elijah met God on Mount Horeb. And today, we hear Jesus meeting both Moses and Elijah, the law and the prophets, on the Mount of Transfiguration. Jesus is the fulfillment. He is the summit of what it means to be human, of our way to God. The mountain is a place of encounter with God. And even humanly, even our own experience, if we've been blessed enough to go to a place where there are mountains, we experience something of beauty, something of majesty. Mountains are a place where we feel small in the presence of grandeur. I was recently in Evergreen, Colorado. It's not too far from Denver. I was leading a retreat for some young people. And as we drove up, it was 7,000 feet up. As we drove up from Denver into the mountains, I could feel something inside. Just my heart being lifted, moved by the beauty that surrounded me. And it was a beautiful experience because I live in Patterson. You know, and those of you who've been to Patterson, and I'm sorry if you're from Patterson, it's kind of a gritty city. You know, it's very industrial and kind of grimy, and so this difference between this gritty and grimy place where I live, surrounded by some real urban struggles, to the beauty of the Colorado mountains. This is the gift of prayer for us, brothers and sisters. We are elevated. And in the first reading, God speaks to Abram. And what does he say to him? Look up at the sky and count the stars. Such will your descendants be. And the scriptures tell us that Abraham put his faith in the Lord. Look up, brothers and sisters. What a great word for us. We cannot always escape our reality to the mountains, to go to the mountains. But we can look up wherever we are, whatever we're doing, and this is what we call prayer. In the Catechism of the Catholic Church, it says this about prayer. Prayer is the raising of the mind and the heart to God. A simple looking up in the midst of our daily concerns. When Jesus prayed in the Gospels, sometimes we would hear that he would look up to his Father. It's not that his Father was necessarily up, but it's a symbol of raising one's heart and mind. On Thursdays, where I live in Patterson, we have a little outreach to the people of our neighborhood. We call it St. Michael's Friendship Cafe. And it's the little building next to our friary. It's a house. And we kind of turned it into a little cafe. So we have soup and hot chocolate and coffee, cookies, just for anyone who wants to drop in between 11 to 2 on Thursdays. And this man who's one of our neighbors came by on Thursday, and I was working there with Brother Samuel. And I'll just call him Manuel. That's not his real name. And I was just asking him about his life. And he told me that he grew up in Puerto Rico, and his father made alcohol. And so when he was 9, he started drinking. And he became an alcoholic. And for a long time, he lived with this struggle of alcoholism. And he said about 14 years ago, he's probably in his 70s now, he was on the street and he was sick of it. And he just said, I prayed. And I said to God, you have to help me stop drinking. Help me stop drinking. And then he looked at me and he said, and for 14 years I've been sober now. And then he said something which really struck me. He said, I don't know how to pray, so I just spoke to him like I'm talking to you. He knows how to pray. It's a personal relationship. And from his reality, from his struggle, from his suffering, Manuel spoke to God, "You have to help me stop drinking." Brothers and sisters, the power of prayer. We can pray anywhere as long as we pray from our hearts. And prayer transfigures us. Manuel was changed by the impact of that prayer. When we pray, we are changed. When we pray, our lives are changed. When we pray, we see life differently. Pope Benedict says, "The one who prays begins to see." And it's interesting, so often we're like the disciples in the gospel. We begin with the Lord and we go up the mountain, but then we fall asleep. Maybe physically, but often spiritually. There's this incredible thing happening. Jesus is meeting with Moses and Elijah, and he's being transfigured, and the disciples are crashed out. And spiritually, I think we can be asleep. Our world kind of makes us drowsy spiritually. St. Paul says this in our second reading: "Their minds are occupied with earthly things." Isn't this our struggle so often? Our minds are occupied with earthly things. We live on this horizontal plane, forgetting that there's someone who loves us, someone who invites us to a relationship with him. But we need to look up. St. Paul goes on to say, "But our citizenship is in heaven." And I love that. I'm from England. I live in America. I've traveled to a number of different countries around the world. But when I remember that my citizenship is in heaven, anywhere is home. Because Christ lives in me. Our citizenship, brothers and sisters, is in heaven, but so often we live as if this world is home. And then we wonder why we're anxious, why we're fearful, why we worry about where things are going. It's because so often we forget to look up to God who holds everything in his hand. Prayer roots us in the presence of God and reminds us who we are and whose we are. A mission is a great time to reorient our vision, to kind of look up again to our relationship with God, to be renewed in that relationship. I remember some years ago, I went for a doctor's appointment. I was living in Harlem in Manhattan, and the doctor was on 86th Street. And I went to see him, had my annual physical, and he phoned me. He said, "Father Emmanuel, generally things are good." But it's that little word, generally. And he said, "Your good cholesterol is a little bit low, and your bad cholesterol is a little bit high." I said, "Well, what does that mean, doctor?" He said, "Well, it means that you need to not eat as much fatty foods." Translation, food that tastes good. "And you need to eat more fruits and vegetables. And you need to exercise more, 3 to 4 times a week for at least 20 minutes. Okay. What did he do? He gave me information, and then he left me with a choice. What do you want? Lent can be a time for us, brothers and sisters, of a spiritual checkup. How's my spiritual health? What are the things that I need to cut out? The things that are bad for me, my sinful habits. And what are the things that I need to put in place of those? This good cholesterol, this good spiritual life, prayer, maybe coming to Mass more often, going to confession. Things that are healthy for my heart and for my soul. So I really want to invite you to come this week to the mission. We begin each night at 7:30. And on Monday, we begin with exposition of the Blessed Sacrament to come into the presence of the Lord. The theme is rekindling Eucharistic amazement. It's been a difficult 2 years for everyone. And so to be able to come back to the Lord and to be with him in the Blessed Sacrament is a real gift. The theme of the retreat is rekindling Eucharistic amazement. And so the first night, I'm going to speak about the Eucharist and God's love for us. And there'll be exposition, a talk, and some music, a time of prayer. Then Tuesday night will be, again, exposition of the Blessed Sacrament and confessions. And there'll be 6 priests here to be able to hear your confession. Again, a beautiful time to come back to the Lord, to experience His mercy and a renewed beginning in our faith. And I would encourage you, if you can only make one night, maybe to come the Tuesday night, so you can experience the grace of a good confession. And then Wednesday night, we're going to close with a Mass. What do we call the Mass? The source and summit of our faith. I love that, right? When you climb a mountain, the summit is the most powerful part. The Mass is the most powerful part of our lives, brothers and sisters, because it's where we receive the very body and blood, soul and divinity of Christ that helps us to live in the grit and the grime of daily life. The mountain is a place of encounter with God. Jesus gave His life for us on a mountain, the hill of Calvary. And He comes to us on this altar. Let us ask for the grace to live lives that don't just stay occupied with earthly things, but that live in relationship with Him who loves us as we look up.